general does fill a psychological need, but it's a psychological need that has to be filled by everyone by something. In other words, Paris thought, but even the Klan, I guess, fills somebody's psychological need. And if you want to, compare the two groups, I would say that science fiction fandom has a lot more going for it than the Klan or anything like that.
I'm glad.
but no, it's on the serious side again. It's not anything abnormal to be into something like science fiction fandom. It's just a hobby like playing chess or anything like that. It just that happens it fulfills more than one psychological need, because people have a psychological need to be in company. People are social animals, and playing chess or something like that isn't that much of a social function, so it fulfills more than one psychological need, and so it's I think it's a sign of health rather than a sign of being abnormal.
Do you feel like being clumped into that group, does that bother you? Like being called a Trekkie, or I remember when I was younger and I called people Trekkie, they got real offended.
The correct term for that really is Trekker. That's kind of our way of knowing who's who. If someone goes around and says they're a Trekkie, we know that they're not as into it as we are. I appreciate what Paul was saying on that point about it being healthful. I don't want parents to get worried that their kids are going to be socially out of it because they are into something so deeply. I think that it is a social thing, that we need that, because like you said, we are social people. We need to be around other people, and this is one way that we can be around other people, is to be part of these fan clubs, to have these likes and interests so deeply in things that we have.
Paul, you had some?
Yes, I think that in evaluating the merits of particular subcultures, you have to look at what values and what ideals are they pressing, or are they pushing. For example, the Star Trek philosophy has to do with world federation, unity of mankind, progress, making things better in the future, scientific advances, which are all very, very good goals. And so if you're going to compare it with other subcultures, I think it's a very progressive group. The people tend to be generally well educated. They tend to be tolerant of other races and other religions and creeds. And
exactly.
Things like that.
You don't see like people who are really heavily into heavy metal rock and roll. They seem to be more of the antisocial type. Yeah. They can't get along with different people, whereas us Star Trek fans, we seem to get along with everybody. We have a ways of communication and understanding because of the Star Trek storylines and the philosophies, that we want to make the world better, and that we don't want to see all the fighting and problems that are going on in the world.
That's certainly a unifying element, I think, in fandom, is this common belief in a common good, a common future for everyone. And that's what brings us all together and allows us to function within these parameters of fandom. We're all looking forward to that day when these universal truths of peace, brotherhood, fellowship bring us all together, and that's why we work so well together.
People look at Star Trek as kind of an off-the-wall thing or out in left field, but when actually it had an impact on me when I was growing up. It shaped my moral fiber.
Absolutely, it's a part. It's become. I agree with you. It's been a part of us. I consider my personal philosophy, to be so ingrained in the Star Trek philosophy, that of looking forward to that day of peace
and diversity.
And diversity.
We're all individuals,
exactly.
And we can live together. We can coexist.
So, how realistic, though, do you feel that this is? I mean, you're all talking about Star Trek as you're basing your lives, how you think that this is how your life should be, but how
philosophy.
realistic?
Right, wait, stop.
That's an ideal.
Let's understand what you're trying to say here, okay? I think what you're saying sounds a little bit like we're good lifers. We don't stop before we buy something at a store and go, what would Jim Kirk buy? We don't do that, okay? But there is a vision that says we may not nuke ourselves next year. We may not poison the air and the water. We may actually make it to the year 2000 and beyond. This is what Roddenberry's basic message is. And in the 60s, that was a very important message because you were in the middle of Cold War. Well, we're starting to realize and see more of that. I mean, read your newspaper today.
Exactly.
I haven't seen the headlines today, but I know there's good news from the East. I know this because it's been good news for the last 2 weeks from the East. We're starting to see this happen, okay? This is the vision that we're all starting to see happen, and we're really all turned on about it. I think one of the things that you're seeing, though, when you say why are science fiction fans like this, understand part of the environment we talked about conventions last month on the show, things that happen. You get 3,000 people that like the same thing together in a room, and you're going to draw some attention, okay? You get 3,000 chess players in a room, okay? They're all there because they like chess. People are going to walk by going, what the heck, you know, all the time, all day long. We do this several times a year, okay? Our clubs always throw parties. We throw theme parties, costume parties. Our focus is such that there's a lot of expressiveness in there. And anytime you get expressive, you're going to have a group of people say, what's going on over there? And there's going to be a little bit of nervousness about that. And we accept that. That's part of it, is to be different and to delight in that differentness and to revel in it and to say, it's okay. And I think that's what we're all trying to say here, is that we can do this. And we can be different, and we can all be the same thing at the same time.
Paul, did you have something to add to that?
Yes, one thing I think that has to be understood is the distinction between what I would call the surface features and what's deeper down. For example, like in a fairy tale, you find elves and princes and things like that, but deep down there's a moral to the story. And for example, there was a story about in the old Star Trek series about a person with two people who were against each other because one was black on one side of the face and white on the other side of the face, and the other one was exactly the reverse. And you know, it was a hidden story about what racism is. And when they got to their home planet, their whole races had killed each other. And so, on the surface, it was just a story about this weird planet, but deep down it was a story about racism. And like in all great literature, that's the way that you get a moral across. You hide it underneath what's on the surface, and what's on the surface is the starships and the phasers and the warp drives and the aliens, but down deep you have just human themes like war and peace, tolerance of other races and creeds, and things like that.
Steve, and do you think that the moral issues behind Star Trek is what made it so popular?
For me, it did anyway.
Is that what got you first interested in the show?
I think that, well, the science fiction, I was, of course, always into that, so that was my first spark there, but once I realized what they were trying to get across, that really hooked me. And although I don't expect to go warping across the galaxy someday, I do visualize world peace. I'd like to see it, you know, the ideals and philosophies that they put across.
I've found that growing up with Star Trek and everything has changed my whole outlook on other genres of science fiction. Growing up, learning the tolerance and everything in science fiction, I go back and watch like The Creature from the Black Lagoon or a classic science fiction, and I ended up feeling sorry for the monster because they were the ones that should have been.
They were acting in character. I think one of the things about science fiction and even fantasy as a whole that is appealing to a lot of people that are into it is the fact that there's a very strong hero all the time. Even though...
We had mentioned earlier that both of you are members of Solstice. Is there a phone number that someone can call?
554-1536. It's his number. Yes. They can call. But science fiction and fantasy always have heroes. Even though in some Godzilla movies, Godzilla is the hero. Okay, but you always have a strong hero you can identify to. In Star Wars, it's Luke. Okay, and even in Lost in Space, it was almost anybody but Dr. Smith. Star Trek, you had Kirk with his trained hair and later on trained toupee, and you know, in The Next Generation, you've got apparently Wesley. You always have real strong heroes. You have this thing that you can relate to and look up to and say, this is going to be my hero. And when I was a kid, that's why I watched it. Is because like, yeah, let's go see this thing go. And then as you watch this, you pick up the morals. They sneak them in, which is the best way to teach, is to sneak in the lesson, okay? And I think Star Trek has been amazingly successful at that. And that's what its popularity is that you watched an episode of Star Trek, and when you turned the TV off, you said, oh my God, I learned something. And you didn't know it. It was painless.
A bit of the hero worship, I guess, you know, when I turned off Star Trek and other kids were playing Cowboys and Indians, I was playing James T. Kirk, you know. And it sounds a little silly, but it really had a big influence.
How many of us on this panel, when we were little bitty kids, used to run around with towels tied around our necks, being Superman? Yeah, you know. Mighty Mouse. That's just part of it. Find a hero and you go for it.
Mighty Mouse.
He was short.